hers.
Let us pray. Guide us, Lord, in all our doings with your gracious favor. Further to your continual help. That in all our works begun, continued, and ended in you, we may glorify your holy name, and by your mercy attain everlasting life, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, send forth, we beseech thee, upon thy servants who bear office in this country, the spirit of charity and justice, that they may in all things walk before thee with steadfast purpose and a single heart, and faithfully serve in their several offices, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Most gracious God, author of all good things, we humbly beseech you for the Parliament of Barbados, especially the Senate at this time assembled, that thou wouldst be pleased to direct and prosper all their counsels to the advancement of thy glory, the good of thy church, and the safety, honor, and welfare of our people. All this we answer in the name of Jesus Christ, our most blessed Lord and Savior. Amen. Together we say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forever. Amen.
The Senate is in session.
Mr. President, messages from Her Excellency, the President.
I received a message from Her Excellency, President of Barbados, which reads as dated January 8th, 2024, which reads as follows. Dear Sir, I wish to inform that in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, under Section 36(1)(f) of the Constitution, the seats in the Senate held by Mr. Lorenzo Ronaldo Herman, JP, and Mrs. Shanika Charmaine Samantha Roberts Odo were declared vacant with effect from 8th January 2024. I am to further inform that in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister, Mr. Chad Jason Blackman and the Reverend Charles Merville Morris have been appointed under Section 36(2) of the Constitution as senators with effect from 8th January 2024. Signed by the President, 8th January 2024.
Mr. President, Senator Morris is present and awaits without.
Please admit him. Senator Morris, Senator the Reverend Charles Merville Morris, let me welcome you to the Honourable the Senate and congratulate you on your appointment. Please take your seat. They're happy to have you join us. You bring with you a wealth of experience in education, having been in teaching for many a year. You bring with you experience in matters of faith, having been a minister of the word for many a year as well. And you also bring with you that wonderful international experience of diplomacy, having just returned to your native land from your sojourn in the United Kingdom. And I think that that interesting mix of experience together with your indomitable spirit will make for an interesting time in our debates if the Honourable decided. So let me welcome you and congratulate you on your appointment to this ancient and honourable institution.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for your kind and warm words of welcome. And given the response of persons to whom I can now refer as my colleagues, I'm sure that they too have indicated that they appreciate my presence here. Being called to serve in a country's legislature is a very humbling experience. And if I feel jittery, sir, it is because I'm humbled by being here. And I'm here because persons have contributed towards my life and towards my development. And I'm sure you must have heard it over and over again. I always pay tribute to the people of Black Bess and St. Peter who raised me. I was raised by a village, sir. I pay tribute to my mother and father, my sisters, my brother. I pay tribute to my wife who has always been there in sickness and in health. I pay tribute to my sister in Winnipeg, who's, even in the dark days, who's always been there to help me along. I pay tribute to those in the diaspora, those in the Barbados High Commission, especially the High Commissioner, with whom I developed a lasting relationship. I pay tribute, sir, to all of those in the United States. Only this morning I received messages from one lady giving me her support. But I also pay tribute to those of the church. There are former Bishop Broom, Canon Peter Haynes, Canon Coleridge Dalton, Canon Curtis Goodrich, and my good friend, the Reverend Father Reggie Neck. These are people who have been there in the good times and the bad times for me. And I want to also thank all the authorities who have been confident enough to have me here to represent the people of this country and to see that the lives of Barbadians continue to be redeemed from all the catastrophes and all the matters that may seem to weigh them down. And I hope, sir, that my contribution will be such. My contribution will be such that when my time here is ended, that all of us will be able to say, this is my land, this is our land. And I pledge to you, sir, my support. I pledge to you my whatever knowledge I have, but I pledge to you, sir, my total commitment to this chamber. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator the Reverend Charles Morris. Let me also make note of the fact that Senator the Honourable Chad Blackman is on duty in relation to the visit of the head of state, the President of Senegal, who's paying a state visit, and he is the minister assigned to the President and is therefore unable to be here this morning. He will take his seat at the next sitting of the Honourable Senate. Other announcements, and I should also place on the record my thanks for the service of our former senators, former Senator Lorenzo Harewood and Senator Roberts Odell, and wish them continued success in their new endeavors.
Announcements by Your Honour.
Yes. In terms of announcements, I have received minutes for confirmation. There are several of them. Minutes of Wednesday, July 26, 2023, August 2nd, 2023, August 9th, 2023, December 13th, 2023, and December 20th, 2023. Clearly, some of them are oversights that are now being corrected. For confirmation, Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I beg to move the confirmation of the minutes as mentioned by the Honourable the President. The minutes cover the following periods for confirmation: Wednesday, July 26, 2023, Wednesday, August 2nd, 2023, Wednesday, August 9th, 2023, and also on a Wednesday in both instances, December 13th and December 20th of 2023.
The question is that those minutes were mentioned stand confirmed. All those senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. Those minutes are therefore confirmed. In terms of excuses for absence, have none. In terms of advice of late arrival, he's in here. I have indications of lateness from her Honour Senator Henrietta Elizabeth Thompson, Senator the Most Honourable Jerome Walcott, and yes, those are my indications of lateness at this point. Those are the announcements for today. Oh, sorry, I knew there was one more. I want to take this opportunity to welcome back to the chamber Senator Dr. Chelson Brathwaite, who was under the weather, and if you had any doubt that he was ill, you know that we dealt with an agricultural matter in his absence, so you would know that there would have had to be illness, not a storm, not a drought, none of the climatic conditions that could adversely affect weather could prevent Senator Dr. Brathwaite from being here to make a contribution on such important matters. But glad to see you in fine shape, and welcome back, Senator Dr. Brathwaite. Senator Brathwaite.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I would like to say a Happy New Year to all my fellow senators. Mr. President, let me thank you, and let me say that I'm pleased to be here. As many senators may know, I had a bout of dengue fever, ended up in hospital for 3 nights, and spent 3 weeks in bed. The condition and the symptoms I would not wish neither for my friends nor for my enemies. It was a horrible experience. But I'm glad to be here and to continue the work to which I have committed, to continue to represent the interests of the people of Barbados. And Mr. President, after the sojourn in hospital, I wrote a letter to the doctor who took care of me, and I would like to share that letter with members of the Senate. My letter was dated January 6, 2024, and was written to Dr. Wayne Clark. Dear Dr. Clark, I wish to take this opportunity to thank you and your team for the outstanding service which I received during my recent hospitalization at the Bayview Hospital. The medical team and the attention which I received was critical to my recovery from dengue infection that caused me considerable pain and discomfort during the period of my illness. Your concern, your attention to detail, your professionalism was all evident during my stay. In this turbulent world where there is much criticism of service quality in our country, yours is a good example of the meaning of service, which could be an example to all for building a better Barbados. Please extend my thanks to your team, including Dr. Destiny Griffith, nurses Clark, King, Gordon, Joseph, Bacchus, Brathwaite, and Andrews, and all the support staff for their kind care and attention. The dedication and expertise of your team were evident in every interaction, and I'm deeply appreciative of the efforts made on my behalf. Best wishes to all for a happy and prosperous new year, and may God continue to shower you with blessings in 2024. Signed, Charleston W.D. Brathwaite, Independent Senator. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Brathwaite.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I am commanded to lay the following document, the Barbados Water Authority Water Protection Zones Order of 2023.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate, and moved by a minister.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I'd like to move the suspension of Standing Order 45-2 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meetings, the ayes have it. Standing Order 45-2 is therefore suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
Introduction of bills.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the following bills and also to move the first readings. So to confirm, Mr. President, we have the following bills of which we're giving notice. The Africa Export-Import in Bank Bill of 2024, the Barbados Revenue Authority Appeals Tribunal Validation Bill of 2024, and we're also giving notice of the following: the Facilitation of International Maritime Traffic Bill and the Commissioners of Probates Bill 2024. I beg also to move the first reading of all four aforementioned bills.
Yeah, do this in front. The question is that the Facilitation of International Maritime Traffic Bill 2024, the Commissioners of Probate Bill 2024, the Export-Import Bank Bill 2024, and the Barbados Revenue Authority Appeals Tribunal Validation Bill 2024 be read a first time. Honourable senators in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Those bills are accordingly read a first time.
Yes, sir.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Mr. President, Order number one, order number two, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Facilitation of International Maritime Traffic Bill 2024.
Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise on this occasion to, of course, conduct the business of the government, but I want to begin my comments today by first expressing the appreciation of the government side, and I believe I want to take the chance of speaking on behalf of all senators to wish the honorable members who have left us and who have gone on to pursue other endeavors. The honorable, there were two members who were in the Senate, Senator Lorenzo Harewood and Senator Shanika Roberts-Odell, who have now gone on. We have seen the announcement of the elevation of our former Senator Lorenzo Harewood to serve at New York as Consul General, and we wish him all the very best in his future endeavors. We expect that we will be hearing exceptionally good things about him and his work in New York on behalf of Barbadian nationals in the diaspora. In the same vein, Mr. President, I want to extend the warm welcome and congratulations on behalf of the Honorable the Senate to the newest member of the Senate, Senator Reverend Charles Morris, who has already shared with us through you initially and then through his own intervention, his breadth of experience, and we expect that he is going to add significant value to the work of the Honorable the Senate. He's going to add substance to our debate, but he's also going to bring his own inimitable personality to the presentation of that substance, and I am very much, certainly as leader of government business, looking forward to that. We look forward to welcoming our additional appointment, who is a member of the team as well, Senator Chad Blackman, who, as all members know, would have served initially, most recently, as the advisor to the Director General of the International Labour Organization in Geneva. Prior to that, he would have served as the ambassador for Barbados at the International Labour Organization. He would have served prior to that as ambassador to the international organizations under the United Nations in Geneva, and he would have been accredited in that role to a number of European and African states, and he is in his own right an attorney at law, a trade lawyer in specialization, and we expect that in his new role as minister in the Ministry of Finance, specifically economic affairs, that he is going to add value to the work of the government, but in this honorable chamber, that he will add value to the work of the Senate. So I want to congratulate them on their elevation and welcome, in the first instance, Reverend Charles Morris to the honorable chamber for the first time. So, Mr. President, I am going to get into the bill which is before us. The bill that we are preparing to debate in this first instance, order number 2 on the order paper, refers to the Convention on the Facilitation of International Maritime Traffic. Mr. President, this is a considerable piece of legislation. It is not one of those things that, for example, has 8 paragraphs, as we have seen in another matter, which we will do today, but it treats to a range of issues which fall under the ambit of the International Maritime Organization. In the other place, Mr. President, and in this place, certainly we have heard extensively about the work that has been undertaken in the maritime space. This is a government, Mr. President, that came to office in 2018 and absorbed for the first time the creation of a ministry with responsibility for the blue economy. In 2022, the Ministry with Responsibility for Blue Economy was absorbed as a ministry for the blue and green economy under the Ministry of Environment. So let me pay it upfront to the idea that there is no ministry with responsibility for the blue economy, because it is not so called. There is a Ministry of the Environment which deals with the blue and the green economy, and the work continues therein. Specifically, however, on matters relating to shipping, they fall under the portfolio of the Ministry with Responsibility for International Transport. And the shipping division that previously would have been assigned to the ministry with responsibility for the blue economy has been assigned to international transport. So all matters relating to shipping, to the port, relating also to the shipping community and the maritime community do fall under international transport. And it is within that context, Mr. President, that this bill is situated. This bill speaks throughout the legislation that is before us to a range of issues covering maritime transportation. When we came to office in 2018, Mr. President, I, at the time, in September 2018, found myself being approached and asked if I would agree to chair the port, the Barbados Port Inc. I took responsibility for that for 2 years. At that time, the then minister of Blue Economy would have raised, one of the very first things that the minister at the time raised with me was that Barbados had conducted an audit of its compliance with the International Maritime Organization, and Barbados had comprehensively failed in most of the areas of the audit. Barbados had not met most of the requirements pre-2018 to allow for an audit of the IMO. And one of the first responsibilities that we were assigned was to ensure that we worked closely along with the Maritime Ministry to address item by item, issue by issue, in a sustained and an intentional way to ensure that Barbados was prepared for a repeat of the audit, and that on this occasion, when that audit took place, that Barbados was in full compliance. At that time, Mr. President, the government undertook to do a range of things. The government, under the ministry with responsibility for maritime affairs, maritime transportation specifically, also took responsibility for ensuring that we had the skills and the expertise that were necessary. We, as an ocean state, and Prime Minister has been speaking, particularly in the context of the climate crisis, about the fact that while we are on the one hand a small island state, we are simultaneously a large ocean state, and that our ocean state, our ocean economy is 400 times bigger than our land space. And so it is a natural progression that there has to be emphasis placed and intentional action on our maritime resources. And so we needed to recruit a team of people who would take responsibility for working on the maritime space and on the issues that had arisen from the audit, many of them legislative. And so it is on that basis that Barbados, for the first time in its history, over time would have recruited first a maritime law consultant, and now Barbados is in possession, first ever, of a director of maritime affairs who is herself an attorney, and who I want to credit. And Mr. President, I have not asked you for permission, but if you would oblige me, I would wish to recognize the considerable work by this young woman who has been the architect of almost all of the maritime law that Barbados has produced since 2018. Ms. Najla King, Mr. President. She is a young professional, Mr. President. She came to my attention before we were in office, actually, because at the time she was off doing a specialization in Malta, I believe, in maritime law with the IMO, and she was performing exceedingly well. And she was introduced to me at the time by someone who was very supportive of her work. She, at the time, Mr. President, came to my attention because I was working in the University of the West Indies, and with her passion for all things maritime law, she wanted to introduce a suite of courses in the University of the West Indies on the basis of her experience internationally and her educational trajectory into Barbados, into the education system, so we could create a cadre of young professionals or professionals who were qualified to work in this maritime space, which Barbados had earmarked subsequently as the blue economy and identified it as an area of priority. This legislation, Mr. President, and I believe every piece of maritime legislation that has come before this honorable chamber and the other place from 2018 till now, has had the fingerprints of Ms. Najla King all over them. And she has been a considerable asset to the people and to the government of Barbados. And so on that basis, Mr. President, we now are in a position where we have a suite of legislation, this one being the latest one, which speaks about the Convention on the Facilitation of Maritime Traffic, but it also in reconciling where Barbados needed to be in terms of its audit requirements and in compliance with the International Maritime Organization. It goes further, Mr. President. It also looks to bring technology into the fray and use the methodologies of a single window system to enable the engagement between the government of Barbados through the Bridgetown Port, the regulatory agencies, whoever they are, including agriculture, customs, and so on, with the ships. Now, here's what I want to share in this context, Mr. President, because this has been a journey, a tremendous journey to get to this stage, not just because of the exceptional work of individuals and individual professionals, but because of visioning. Mr. President, in 2019, September, the government of Barbados moved to introduce an Asikuda World system under the Customs Department. Asikuda World was introduced in September 2019, and it was not a painless exercise. In fact, it was anything but. And it was the first introduction, Mr. President, of a single window system that would allow for the digitalization of the engagements for clearances at the border. At the time, the port also understood that there had been an agreement that dated back many years prior to this government even coming to office for an electronic single window. And so there needed to be what we will call going forward an ESW, electronic single window. This was also supposed to capture clearances at the border, but for a different purpose. Related, but a different purpose. This was under the Ministry of Commerce. I, at the time, as chairman of the port, grew concerned. I thought, well, we have the Asikuda World system already under customs. We know that the electronic single window is coming, and that's going to deal with documentary compliance, the components of documentary compliance for trade facilitation. But how are these things all going to go together? How are they all going to work together in the interest, ultimately, of consignees, and then ultimately in the interest of consumers? And so we introduced what was a best practice platform called the Port Community System. This legislation captures the mechanism of a port community system that creates a single platform that harmonizes all of the windows through which government interfaces with the importing and trading community. The maritime single window then, for its part, came into effect, or rather it began to be developed as part of the discussion. And I remember I said, if you remember, I said, Mr. President, that the then Minister of Blue Economy would have been the one who started the process of looking at how we needed to be compliant with the IMO audits, and the legislative process flowed from there. This is the culmination of a lot of that work. And so the MSW at that time then, Mr. President, came into effect as the mechanism not by which only cargo or people or documents were shared, but the mechanism by which ships themselves now would be communicating with port agents, namely the port and all of the relevant regulatory agencies at the border. And so you now have, Mr. President, a suite of legislation framing out what the maritime space is going to look like in terms of legislative compliance. It also now makes sure that Barbados is in a position as a port state agent to be able to meet the requirements of the International Maritime Organization, but it also aims to improve port efficiency. And port efficiency only works if it is in the interest of the importers and the people for whom the importers are bringing in goods. People, consumers, Barbadians who are going into the retail and the distributive sector to be able to purchase the goods that are being imported into the country. 90% of all goods imported into this country, Mr. President, come in through the Bridgetown port. 90. The remaining percentage comes through the airport, and those are largely perishables, things that needed to be delivered just in time. But for the most part, the Bridgetown port and its efficient or inefficient operation is directly connected to 90% of the goods coming into the country. And so the effective implementation of first an Asikuda World system in 2019 by the Customs Department, a maritime single window system, which is being developed and put into legislation, and a port community system, and ultimately an electronic single window that will pull all of the mechanisms into a single platform under the PCS are being captured. This legislation, Mr. President, is landmark legislation. It is a significant turn in the process of modernizing Barbados' maritime space, modernizing port and trade facilitation, and modernizing the way in which people are able to interface with the port at the back end. But most importantly, Mr. President, I want to go into the parts of efficiency. This week, as Minister of Business, I spent a considerable amount of time meeting with the Chamber, the port agents, the ports, the Department of Commerce, to be able to rationalize how do we then treat a range of issues, including how costs translate once they are imported into country, into the retail and the distributive sector. What are the measures that needed to be implemented? We have a responsibility for reporting to the country. You would have seen on Sunday, for example, published in the newspaper, you would have seen the prices surveys that we are responsible also for publishing. You saw that published, Mr. President. It tells you by product what the cost is and where you can get different products. But what it doesn't tell you, Mr. President, is what is behind that cost. How much does it cost for a container to be shipped from the US to Barbados? How long does it take, with the Suez Canal having issues, Mr. President? And now we have a pact with the Saudis that ships that cannot avoid going through the Suez Canal, because they are avoiding the Suez Canal, they're going around Cape Horn instead, but they're going up to Saudi Arabia, they're depositing their goods, taking them by train onto the other side, and then bringing them around, going the long way. That adds time, and if it adds time, it adds cost to the goods. Then you have the Panama Canal on the other side, which is shorter, easier. It is a better route. Most of our goods actually do come through the Panama Canal, but you have challenges there because you have climate affecting the water levels in the canal, reducing the number of ships that can come through at a time. And the consequence of that, Mr. President, is that you have a slowdown, I am advised by the business community, by 2 or 3 days of goods clearing through the Panama Canal. What does that mean? It means that there's a consequential implication for costs. So we as a government have to ensure that once those goods are landed, that we are in a position wherever possible to mitigate the costs that could come between landing and getting to the final consumer. And that is where the port comes in. If we, Mr. President, do not have a system, as is contemplated in this legislation, where there is a maritime single window that engages with ships and plans the arrival of ships into port to be able to allow for clearances and discharge of cargo in a timely and in a seamless manner, what ends up happening, Mr. President, is that a ship will remain offshore. It will remain off the coast of Barbados, waiting to come into port, waiting to come in to be offloaded, and it will pick up what we call demurrage charges. Those demurrage charges, as a consequence, Mr. President, will result in increased costs. It is in the interest of Barbados that the government puts measures in place, like with the maritime single window contemplated in this legislation, to ensure that cargo ships come into port as soon as they arrive into country. That we have a system of scheduling the arrival of cargo into country so that demurrage charges do not rack up. And what do I mean when I say demurrage? Demurrage charges for the purpose of shipping refer to detention or delay charges when ships are not able to discharge their cargo. Quite simply put, then a ship that is leaving Port of Miami in the Everglades, or Port of Los Angeles, Port of Miami, those are the 3 ports that we typically would receive the majority of goods on, and coming just to Barbados. That's not a real thing. They're coming to multiple stops along the chain of islands, and they have to keep it moving because they have to be able to keep it moving on the outbound in order to get back up, pick up fresh cargo, and go again. Any delays in that chain, that run, will have a consequential impact on their overall operations, and they charge a fee for delays in any given port. Those fees are called demurrage charges. They range from shipping line to shipping line. So like now we're in the middle of cruise season. We are in the middle of cruise season today. There's 1 cruise ship in port. Yesterday there were 3. But on days where there are cruise ships in port, and you have a timeline to turn those ships around, those are days you have what we call no cargo days. So the cargo ships are required to wait offshore until the cruise ship comes in and goes back out, and then that cargo comes in and is discharged. It is in our interest to make sure that we are able to discharge cargo quickly. It is for that reason, Mr. President, that when we made the decision 2+ years ago to invest in the expansion of the cargo facilities of the port, many people may not have understood it. Many people may not have understood it because you see big cruise ships, you see people coming in, and those are important and is a critical factor on the tourism side. But on the cost of living side and on the economy side, you have to be able to balance cruise with cargo. And it is the reason why Barbados then made a decision 2 years ago to invest in the expansion of the cargo facilities in the port. Because the merge charges can range per day from $5,000 to $10,000 USD. Not BDS, USD. If a cargo vessel is staying offshore and picking up charges per day, either $5,000 or $10,000 USD for however long it has to wait per day, I bet you your bottom dollar, I promise you, those costs are being passed on to consumers when the goods are imported into country. It absolutely is in Barbados' best interest to do exactly what this government did 2 years ago, to agree to invest in the expansion of our cargo facilities and to have a dedicated cargo port. That is what we did. And so the allowance, therefore, 1, for a dedicated cargo port to minimize demurrage charges, 2, to have the coordination as contemplated in this legislation for a maritime single window, which then allows us to coordinate with ships when they will arrive and to pair shifts and deploy teams to discharge that cargo, is an absolutely critical thing that may seem esoteric and far-fetched, but it translates into the cost of living into the country. If we do not reduce cargo charges internal to the port, the imported costs that we will absorb from the increased cost of shipping, the imported costs that we will absorb from the increased cost of first cost at product import level from the manufacturers overseas, will then result in further increased costs when we add the implications of local charges as a consequence of the port. So it is an absolutely critical matter for us to introduce a maritime single window that allows for the coordination of port clearances. What is also important, Mr. President, is that in the electronic single window, which is a partnership with UNCTAD, we are working through the implementation of that, and that project is expected to close out in September of 2024, and we will bring that to final completion after a long time. We've had to rescope the project, recalibrate, go out to market, bring persons in to allow us to get the project closed out, and we're finally on track to be in a position to close that project out under my ministry in September of 2024. But we have had to bring in skills. For the Asakudo World project, also done under customs at this time, that was also done by UNCTAD. What is special about the maritime single window in this legislation, Mr. President, is this. Not only what I just said, it was built entirely in-house by the Bridgetown Port. There is a team of young professionals that are perhaps some of the most innovative technology professionals that I have come across in this country. And they have internal to the Digital Innovation Unit, which I had the opportunity to create as chairman of the port, they then have built in-house this maritime single window, which is now in use as contemplated in this legislation. It is a fine example of how Barbados can lead its own way forward and how Barbados can use its professionals in ways that allow us to take advantage of their expertise and their areas of passion. Now, there are a few things that I want to just get into on the bill, at the specifics of the bill. One, as I said, focuses on implementing the Convention on the Facilitation of International Maritime Traffic. It also focuses on, as I discussed, the maritime single window to make provision for the electronic transmission and exchange of information in order to facilitate and expedite the clearance of international maritime traffic. I've explained the why of that. To create an enabling environment for a port community system. I've already described the port community system as the platform which will house all of the mechanisms, and also to provide for a number of related matters that cover a range of additional areas. And what are some of those additional areas, Mr. President? The JRCC, for example, has become a critical entity functioning across the landscape in advanced passenger information systems and advanced customs information systems. When you travel on an aircraft, Mr. President, and you are filling in your online ED form, that online ED form, the information is picked up first and foremost by the JRCC. Then the same thing applies to cargo information. It keeps us safe. They are the security arm of what happens there, both on immigration as well as on cargo. We also have, Mr. President, the contemplation that there's going to be the mechanism for implementation, because each time we talk about legislation, we talk about systems that are being put in place, we want to figure out how to make these things work. And last night, in talking to Najla on the legislation and making sure that there was policy coherence, because that's important to me, we agreed that this legislation contemplates, as you will see in part 2, it talks about the establishment of a national maritime transport facilitation program. This is in clause 6.1 of the legislation. But we already have a national trade facilitation task force. We have a port efficiency subcommittee, and it is contemplated that all of these entities will then bring the related work on cargo, on clearances, and on ships under a single umbrella where there is policy coherence and that we have clear implementation. Now, Mr. President, the other thing that I want to raise here is captured in the legislation as well. I want to say that it is a bugbearer for many people in the business community, and it is a bugbearer certainly for me as Minister with responsibility for the ESW and for the National Trade Facilitation Task Force. Many moons ago, Mr. President, when the World Bank used to do the doing business indicators, there was a metric within there that talked about trading across borders. And trading across borders had two components: documentary compliance and cost efficiency. Barbados performed poorly, historically and consistently in both. Documentary compliance was a problem, cost was a problem, because documentary compliance, we're having a fight. Everybody knows this. I ain't saying nothing that everybody don't know. It was expensive and it was cumbersome. Go here, go there, clear there. That's not what a modern facilitation system can look like. And that is why so much work has gone into, since 2019, starting with ASACUDA, clearing the way for us to deal with the issues of both documentary compliance and then consequently cost. ASACUDA World, for example, has 43 importers in the Trusted Traders Program. What does that mean in Trusted Traders Program? It means that we had to identify the entities in country that imported the largest volume of items regularly and therefore were embedded in the system, and to put a mechanism for risk assessments and pre-clearance and post-clearance audit after the fact to expedite clearances. There's one entity in this country, Mr. President, that imports perhaps the highest number of containers per week. There's one entity that brings in about 45 containers a week. One. It is the largest importer in country. There are only 3 that are in that basic category, but that's the top one, 43 to 45 containers a week. How do you make sure that the throughput for that volume of containerized traffic is imported and cleared in a timely manner so it gets to the intended consignee, therefore not reducing costs, therefore not increasing costs? That's really what a lot of this is about. Thinking about how your delays at each stage of the journey will impact on cost. And this is what I mean, Mr. President, for example. And I say this openly because it is something that I know Barbadians have been troubled by for a long, long time. If I get my goods coming through the port is not going to discharge that container in anything over 24 hours. Because I already told you, you need to get it off the ship, let the ship go on board its business, and then you are able to have the container in port. But you need to be able to get that container out of the port and over to the consignee, because the consignee needs to be able to empty that container and get it back. Because usually, port charges are free for the first 5 days, and you charge a detention fee, a demurrage fee, after a certain number of days. So we are now in the process of making sure that we have to get those goods out of the port in the shortest possible time. It's not in the port's or the country's interest to keep it. So what ends up happening then in that instance, Mr. President? You get it cleared by the port, you get it cleared by customs. It has to also be cleared depending on what is declared in the documents that have been submitted. It has to be possibly cleared by the Ministry of Health. It has to possibly be cleared by plant quarantine. It possibly has to be cleared by veterinary authorities. It possibly has to be cleared by import, by agriculture. It possibly has to be cleared also by commerce, my ministry, for import license, depending on what the product is. And then all of a sudden, you have turned a process that, if it is kept manual, can turn from 5 days with no port charges into an extended period of time. That increases costs. And it makes us inefficient on the documentary compliance side. So the electronic single windows, starting with Asakuda, continuing with the MSW for ships, continuing with the ESW for all goods, and then having that anchored in a platform, the port community system, where not only do you have the technology platform, but you also now need to have the legislative reform of a range of additional pieces of legislation that make the process of clearance smoother. So simply put, Mr. President, you have the Health Services Act, you have the Quarantine Act, you have the Quarantine Maritime Regulations, and you have all of the related pieces of legislation that now need to be brought into harmony with these systems, so that you're not having a succession of persons coming, or I should say, you're not having people coming successively to clear items, but they're all being cleared almost all at once, so that you're not having the unnecessary delays because people are clearing manually. Those are some of the things that are contemplated both in this legislation, Mr. President, and in the electronic single window as it is earmarked for the country. And so, Mr. President, it is my expectation that as we go through this legislation and we deal with all of the matters relevant to the arrival of a ship, how ships arrive, what happens when ships arrive, the stay of the ship in port, what are the mechanisms put in place, the departure of ships and therefore the clearance of space for other ships to arrive will then be covered comprehensively under 1, the legislation, 2, the platforms that we have spoken about, and then 3, under the implementation programs and task forces that exist in government to ensure policy coherence. The final element that I want to raise here, Mr. President, is this. The final element that I want to raise specifically is about where we find ourselves in a position with international partners. I've situated this in terms of the consumers and ensuring that on clearances that we are able to reduce costs, but I also want to make sure that I situate this in an international context. Barbados has long been a member of the International Maritime Organization. Barbados ought not to have found itself in the pre-2018 period out of compliance with IMO regulations. We therefore now have put a series of measures in place to ensure that Barbados does what is best, not just for Barbados and Barbadians, but that Barbados stands tall among its peers in international fora, and so in saying so, the concrete representation of that is that Barbados, is the first of its Caribbean neighbors to have gone this far in terms of the expansiveness of our legislative reform. We have embedded the requirements of the FAO Convention into legislation in a way that is still being followed by others to develop additional capacity. And we have also gone further than anyone else in the region to embed a maritime single window in that legislative framework. Prime Minister has a way of saying to us all the time, Barbados must not be afraid to lead. Barbados and Barbadians must not be afraid to lead. There is nothing wrong with being the first mover. When we could be the worst in some instances and we don't like it, let us be comfortable with being the first and the best and being comfortable in that space. Barbados now can stand tall amongst ourselves. First, as being that country that is committed to ensuring port efficiency, to reducing costs to consumers, to reducing costs to the business community so they in turn can reduce costs to consumers, and making sure that our port system is the most efficient system, not just in the Caribbean, but in any equivalent size port. But that also our legislative framework under the International Maritime Organization and our compliance with our obligations under the IMO will therefore then allow for us to stand tall in the IMO in London. And I believe that the Honourable Senator who has just joined us for the first time would recall that many times Barbados has taken a sojourn from capital to London, where the IMO is headquartered, to attend meetings of the IMO and to work on a range of matters such as this. I am pleased to have brought this matter here today to conclusion and to have been in a position to see it brought across the finish line once and for all. The work will continue. It must continue. It may not start out as perfect, but it will become something of which we can stand, something in which we can stand and be proud over time, and that the benefits will redound to the Barbadian consumers over time. And I beg to move, therefore, Mr. President, that this bill now be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummings. Speakers on this bill? Senator King.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to pick up from where the Honourable Leader of the Government Business left off in terms of the importance of what this bill is about. As a person who worked on cruise ships, I can bring it from that perspective. It is difficult and oftentimes overlooked by even the very persons at the top of the chain in the cruise industry as to the importance of crew members in terms of how they interact with your passengers, the information that they would give to persons landing in different territories as to where are the hot spots to go, what are the things that you want to spend your money on, and other things like that. And so it's important that when we start talking about the landing of crews, getting them through the port, getting them onto the land, to interact with persons, taxi people, restaurants, it goes on and on. These are the first contact that your passengers have. And these are the ones who are asked all the questions. And I myself can speak to this because of many times, as passengers change every week, regardless of how the run is, people will be asking you, so if you get to Barbados, where is a nice place to have a meal? What are the attractions that you can go and see? How do you get from point A to point B? What does it cost me for a taxi to get from point A to point B? All of these small things, which people see as small things, increasingly important to what kind of revenue is spent by that particular passenger within the time frame that they are here and the things that they participate in. And so with this, and I was looking through it, and it covers a lot of things. It looks at security, it looks at stowaways, all these different things that we would probably take for granted, but we're also in a world today that is rapidly changing all the time. And oftentimes when you heard about stowaways and things like that, people think of that years gone by when things like that will happen. I could have an instance, like for instance, 1865, people leaving this port and going to Liberia, where the passengers about 346. When you get to Liberia, you got 350 something, a number of stowaways from Barbados. And so even from back then, we had this particular problem. But looking at this, this bill, there are different sections which deal with different things. And like I said, security is one of them. And I'm very conscious of the world that we live in. And a lot of people sometimes like to shut their eyes to these things, and they say things like, it will never happen in Barbados. I am not one who takes that particular stance, because I know that if you have persons who have ill intent for anyone, that they will find a way to do whatever it is that they want to do in any part of the world. And it is important that all these kinds of measures for the security, you understand who are the people who are on that ship, the name of each and every passenger, crew member, their passports. People don't pay a lot of attention to these things because oftentimes they don't know how important this information is, as was mentioned earlier, for the security of the place. But having had the experience, I know for firsthand how important that is. Who you leave with, you know, many times you're on a ship and you have to be there by a particular time to get out. And if you're not there at that particular point in time, it is possible that you will have to catch a plane or something and get to the next stop in order for you to think. This is the seriousness within which these things work. And again, charges that can amount to the ships themselves. And people got to realize that this is business. At the end of the day, it is business. And businessmen are in the business of making profits, not losses. And so therefore, we have to be competitive, because the same way that tourism is what it is to us in the Caribbean, it is the same thing to other parts of the world also. And we are competing globally. And so therefore, we have to have a global mindset when we are going to do things. And a lot of the things that we would have gotten away with in the past, because we say to ourselves, well, we are small and now developing and all these things, that means absolutely nothing in the world of competition. I mean, people would like us to be mediocre so that they can get business. And we must never allow ourselves to fall into the trap that I think some people like us to believe that, oh, you know, people really kind of pity you or like you real bad because you're small and they know you don't have the capacity to do this, you don't have the capacity to do next. These are things that I have heard people say. I mean, I would go back to a simple quote that was attributed to a person who shall remain nameless once, but it was that things like downgrades and these things don't really mean anything. They don't mean anything to anybody. And, you know, Mr. President, at the time when I heard the comments being attributed to someone, I thought to myself, okay, what is the thinking behind such a comment? Because we are part and parcel of a global citizenship, if you want to put it that way. We don't make the rules. We're small. We don't make the rules, but we got to abide by the rules. And we don't make a lot of the major decisions about things, but we got to abide by them. And if we are to survive and to be competitive as competitive as we can be, then we have to always seek to improve upon what it is that we are doing. And getting, as was mentioned earlier, getting food stuff, all the other things that we have to import in and out of the port as efficiently as humanly possible will have ramifications and implications for reducing costs to customers, reducing costs to business people, the speed within which we can get things done by getting them out of the port in a good time. And a lot of the complaints that people have usually will come around the Christmas time when people are quarreling over and over about being able to get their things out of the port. But it's much wider than that. The efficiency of running it on a day-to-day basis is where this legislation, this bill is really seeking to take us to. There are a number of things that are going to be put in place to affect that. And I believe that as we go forward with this, the world, like I said before, the world is always changing around us. Nothing is ever cast in stone. But there are a number of things that I believe that we could have done if we were paying enough attention to these type of things previously. But I want to commend this particular administration for coming in, as was mentioned, in 2018 and looking at these things and forward thinking, understanding how important it is to get these things done right and to get them done now rather than to let them lag and lapse and go on. So I support this 100%, and I am sure that once these things begin to take shape and be implemented, that people on the ground will begin to feel and experience also the benefits of doing what we are seeking to do at this point in time. With those few words, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator King. Senator Dr. Bradford.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. President, and I rise in support of the bill that has been brought to this honorable chamber, as I think is very important for us as we go forward. For small island developing states like Barbados, maritime transport is a critical part of our sustainability, as we import the majority of the vital inputs that are necessary, such as food, energy, and other important inputs for manufacturing and for the construction sector. It is therefore important that we, as a country, are up to date with the systems and the procedures that contribute to efficiency and productivity of maritime transport. The government must therefore be congratulated for updating the procedures and the methods which contribute to efficiency and increase productivity in these areas, and of course, reduce costs. These new regulations must be implemented and closely monitored to ensure that we remain up to date and current in the procedures which are covered by this legislation. Lack of efficiency in the procedures outlined here will result in increased costs and increase in the cost of living in our country. Maritime transport is the lifeline of the economy of small island developing states like Barbados, and it's necessary for the survival of tourism, for the survival of our fisheries industry, and for the import of food. Especially, Mr. President, in the context of the import of food, this is a critical need in a country that produces only 20% of the food that is consumed locally. And therefore, the timely and efficient implementation of maritime transport and clearance procedures is critical for our food security. It is one of the most important roles in facilitating the movement of goods and people and the inputs that are critical for our economy. The current global challenges as a result of the war in Gaza that is impacting the Suez Canal, the climate challenges in the Panama Canal will result in increased costs to us as most of the things we import travel by maritime means. It is therefore important that we do all that we can when the products arrive at our shores to ensure that efficient methods are applied to reduce costs and to maintain efficiency and productivity. The reality of today, with the possibility of increasing disruptions in global trade as a result of war, as a result of cyber attacks, and all the challenges we face in maritime transport today, imply that we must do all that we can as a small nation to ensure that our systems are effective, competitive, and productive. I therefore support this bill. I think it's an important piece of legislation for our country, and therefore I see this as a step forward in our development. I'm obliged, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Brathwaite. Senator Morris.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand here in support of this piece of legislation before this chamber. I read the contents, and what stands out before me is this question: how do we make the Barbados Port Inc. more efficient? And I believe, sir, that efficiency is the order for Barbados. If we are to be successful, if we are to gain maximum economic benefits, then efficiency must be the hallmark, especially at our port of entry. I have attended one or two MIO meetings in London during my stint as the Deputy High Commissioner, and I understand the importance of being internationally compliant, because we cannot be left behind. We cannot, there's these days, there's this intention of blacklisting and leaving out. I believe, sir, that what we have proposed here will go a far way in helping redeem matters in Barbados. So there's this element in Barbados that every time digitization is mentioned, there is always a cluster. And so I speak frankly on these issues, who always try to take us back into the past. But let me give you, sir, some indication of what may have happened in the past. When this whole port issue came about, it came out, sir, as a deep water harbor. But even before that, the concept of a port system was important to Barbados even during the colonial days, during the days of slavery. Then we had the pier. That suited them then because of the system that was in place, the system of slavery, the slave system. It suited them then. As we move on, Right Excellent Sir Grandy Adams decided, and he realized that how important the development of that pier and that system and that port system was. And then it took the Right Honourable Tom Adams to envision a port system that would benefit this country. And today, we are here with further improvements after the port itself was incorporated. So in this digital age, the port must continue. The Port Inc. must continue its transformation. I believe it is timely. This world is moving on, and we must keep up with it. And as was previously said, there is nothing wrong sometimes in leading. As a matter of fact, sir, we now have a reputation as being a leader in this world. I believe, sir, that matters at the Barbados Port Inc. that would have taken days and sometimes weeks to complete can now be done in a matter of hours. You see, the port, if you look at it as a digestive system, you will see that some of the most important things come in, and some of the most important things go out. And therefore, it is of great importance to us. But we must have the work ethic to go with it to ensure that Barbadians achieve maximum benefits. After all, it is responsible for our existence. And when we take the importance of even tourism into consideration, our main income earner, and all the things that come through the port make efficiency all the more important. Every economic sector depends on operations at Barbados Port Inc. And therefore, given the linkages between the Barbados Port Inc. and the other sectors, then we see the necessity. But sir, there are other areas I think that we can examine as well. Improvements can be made. I believe, sir, that with all the cruise ships and the cruise liners coming to Barbados, the time has come for us to establish cambios at the ports of entry. I wasn't sure how I was going to include the airport in this, but after the leader talked about ETAs and the airlines, I take that as my cue, that I can also include the airport in this. Because there was a time when there was a cambio at the airport. It is not there anymore. Cambios are important because I believe that passengers coming in will be able to obtain their requisite foreign exchange, and when they are leaving, they're able to adapt to their national currency. So I believe it is important to have cambios. I have done a little investigation myself, and I am told that it is very expensive to have a space at our ports of entry for things like cambios. I also understand that in places like Trinidad, who may have had the same problem, I think it's the National Commercial Bank of Jamaica that operates one there. Now, I know that if that were to happen here, we would hear, though, that Barbados has sent itself out to Jamaicans. But I want to say that if we should go to a foreign entity, obviously the profits will be repatriated to those other countries. And therefore, some mechanism must be put in place for this activity become more and more efficient. We must have Barbadian investment there, and therefore ways must be devised, methods must be devised in which we can have intervention by locals. Wherever I go internationally, there are cambios in the airports. They're at Heathrow, they're at Gatwick, in all of them. But going hand in hand with all of this, I said from the beginning, is the matter of efficiency. And if we are looking at our gaining maximum benefits from our economic activity, then there are other areas as well. Taxis, sir. I believe that all of these persons that work within that particular precinct are important. And they too must be able to gain maximum benefit from any improvements in the port system. And I believe that mechanisms can be put in place so that our taxis, our taxi operators can benefit, can gain maximum benefit. But I believe the time also has come for us to regulate taxi fares. Taxi fares should not be left to the discretion of the operator based on circumstance, based on time of the year, and based on occasion. There are persons who come here to do business. And I have been able to learn that 2 persons came here in Barbados to do business, and they were taken around the country. They asked to be taken around the country, and at the end of the visit, they indicated an interest in purchasing land in Barbados, and they were told by the operator, if I knew that you were about to purchase land, I would have increased the fare. That old-time system cannot operate. The same thing happened to a couple, friends of mine, all years night, who were charged $125 from the Sands Hotel to rendezvous because it was all years night. Luckily enough, the receptionist called another taxi who charged them $25 each. I believe that such things are acceptable. And we need to look at how we do this sort of business. I also believe, sir, that Barbados is a brand. This is something that I push heavily in the United Kingdom. Barbados is a brand. Barbados means something. Barbados has things that everyone else would like to have. And one other area in which I believe we can have a brand in terms of tourism, in terms of the port system, is taxis. In England, you have the black taxi, and in the United States, you have the yellow cabs. I believe that we can have a yellow and blue cab, because this is our brand. This is us. So I'm convinced, sir, that with the developments at the Barbados Port Authority, Inc., with the developments in other sectors in our society, with the developments in other departments, we can improve our lot. Mr. President, sir, I am aware that this is my maiden speech here. So let me say this. I am fully aware that the task before us is tremendous. I know that really our reality is impaired. But we can repair it and we can perfect it. So our task, as I said, sir, is to save the lives of Barbadians, to ensure Barbadians can live freely and happily in this country. That Barbadians must also be protected from the predilections of life. I believe that for all that we have gone through, we can redeem our society, but we cannot do it at one time. We can do it one day at a time, one person at a time, one action at a time. Because I believe if we can save the life of one individual, we can save the life of many. And if we can save the lives of Barbadians, we may even save the lives of the world. change one life, and we can begin to change the world. I know, sir, and as I said, I speak very frankly on these matters. I know that this country was broken, suffering from the glorious years of mismanagement, suffering from the pandemic to the ash flow, to storms, and they're still impacting on us. So our society was broken, but we can put it back together. We are looking at redeeming first the small things, and we are doing it by small steps. Because, as was said earlier, redemption is a journey. We must never see injustice and suffering and poverty as unchangeable. And I want to identify with that change. I noticed, sir, the seating arrangements in this chamber. I believe in symbols. In the other chamber, they sit face to face. Here, we sit side by side. That may indicate an absence of confrontation. But I believe that when we meet hand in hand, side by side, we debate, we discuss, and we converse. But we do so to make this country better. And I believe, sir, that with all the talent that we have, and all the emerging legislation, and the competent persons we have here in this chamber, we can achieve our goal. Not only making Barbados #1, but keeping it at #1. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Reverend Morris. Senator Dr. Hines.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Happy New Year to all, and I am elated to have the pleasure of speaking after our newest senator, Senator Reverend Morris, my former teacher. He was actually, to just share something very briefly, he was one of the first teachers I had in entering secondary school. I think he was actually the very first class that I had, and I was terrified at the voice. When I heard this voice in the classroom, I was shaking. And it was one of these classes where he used to ask people to read. And I was so nervous that I would be called on to read. And of course, I was. Of course I was. And I was called on, I had to be corrected for a pronunciation. I would never forget this. I was terrified. However, Reverend Morris, Senator Reverend Morris, was a really enjoyable teacher, and I hope that he enjoys his time here. And it's interesting that he is here, and the person that was here before him was my student. So former student, so change of roles. But to the business. We have before us here a piece of legislation. It is 202 pages long. It's quite lengthy. It contains a lot of information that I believe is probably important. And I hope that it is all well constructed, that it has been appropriately scrutinized, that there are no errors in it. That is my hope. Because all I can do, Mr. President, is hope these things, considering that we received this document on Friday, the 26th of January, 2024, and today is Wednesday, the 31st of January, 2024. This is not to say that I have not had the ability to read the document, to peruse it. However, 5 days is not sufficient time for me to become an expert in this area, to do the level of research that I would like, so that I'm comfortable speaking about this in an in-depth way, discussing in committee, and providing the kind of feedback and oversight that I believe is my duty in this place. I believe this is our duty to provide a check This is one of the reasons that we have this place. This is one of the reasons that all of the members do not come from just one side, that there are independent senators, and there should be opposition senators, but there are none. Whatever people may think, there are none in here. There are none, I assure you. But, Mr. President, I know that the government will congratulate itself on this legislation, and perhaps it should. Perhaps it contains things that are worthwhile and that will move these facilities at the port in a direction that one would wish, but being genuine in the absence of explanatory notes, a briefing, or the requisite support as pretty much part-time members of parliament who do not have research assistants or anything of that sort that would allow us to get up to speed over the weekend while still attending to our jobs and other responsibilities on Monday and Tuesday. I find this to be a really difficult task and a significant expectation. So the nature of my comment is not to speak on the content of the bill, because I do not want to make a fool of myself in attempting to do so when I have not had the ability to study this in the way that I would like, that I would be comfortable with, because these are important matters. So those who have had the ability, I just have to say, I hope that you all have known what you are doing, but I really cannot say that I am in favor, nor can I say that I'm against this legislation per se, because I have not had the capacity, the capability, the time, the courtesy that I would have liked to be able to address this legislation in a meaningful way. The question that I have is there some emergency? Is there some clock that is running down that has forced us to have to deal with this in this way? We had a pandemic, and at that time there were emergency matters. There were matters that I could understand that we had to get this done. And in other instances, there have been emergency matters when we have been told this is an emergency, the clock is ticking, this needs to be done by X date. Please, we know it is difficult, work with us on this. Is this an emergency? Is it urgent? Is it so urgent that we have to have all three readings of this 202-page piece of legislation on one day? What is the urgency? That is the only question that I have. I cannot ask further questions because at this stage, I would have to be working on a few things. One is trust that the content of this legislation has been communicated effectively. And I cannot say that I distrust that. But what I can say is that often when we have discussions on legislation, we tend to talk about the theme, and we don't get too granular. And in the absence of that, and in the absence of my ability to assess this appropriately, that is my question, Mr. President. What is the emergency? What that has caused this to be brought before us so quickly without being able to provide the governance function that I believe this honorable chamber has been tasked with. With those words, Mr. President, I am obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Hines. Any other speakers? Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to thank all of the honourable senators who have spoken on this bill. And I'm going to start, first of all, by acknowledging the comments made by Senator John King. Senator John King is speaking about the references of cruise ships. It is an absolute truth. Important points having been made. Senator Brathwaite, thank you also for your comments. And Dr. Hines, 5 days is indeed a short time, and I can assure you that for me, with ministerial responsibilities and running a couple of sectors, this has been a long pull for me as well. But I assure you that I have both had the time, the opportunity, and the capacity to go through it in the 5 days that were given to all of us in the same way that I understand. However, that perhaps there needs to be the opportunity for additional explanatory notes. But I can assure you that notwithstanding all of your obligations, because it is the business of the government and the people of Barbados, that I have made the time to go through it. I also want to point out here that the stakeholders, one of the hallmarks of this government and it is perhaps one of the things that I am most proud. I want to say, for example, that sometimes there's a commentary. Sometimes there's a commentary, and I heard it this morning in the newspaper on government flip-flopping, government changing its path. This is a government that listens, but it's also a government that engages. This legislation and anything that is as substantive as this always has the benefit of extensive stakeholder consultations. The government is not expecting that those of us in this room will be experts on everything. And so we spent the time having working groups, meeting with the various communities that are affected or would be involved in the process of implementing legislation, so that by the time it comes here, there's very little that oftentimes has not been shopped extensively with the various stakeholders who are experts in their own right and who would very much take the time to go through this and ensure that it is there. In speaking also last night with the Director of Maritime Affairs who worked on this, I asked her a question about whether or not there were elements within the legislation that would allow for there to be additional directives as need be as things came up. And her advice to me was that the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, who is the legal advisor on legislative drafting to the government, who does not sit in this chamber, is in a position to advise that there are directives attached to the legislation that would allow for any specific additional elements to be treated to or amended therein over time. So I give the country and this chamber the assurance that legislation like this, that is so substantive, does not come this far unless it has been extensively shopped through with the stakeholders who have the opportunity to give their feedback. Because we as a government understand the responsibility of engaging with people, listening to our people, and where they have had inputs, those inputs are reflected in the draft that is before us. And my colleague was just reminding me that this has been around for a long time. This started with me. Started with the minister who was responsible for the blue economy, and it has continued with the current Minister of International Transport, Mr. Gooding-Edgell. And so therefore, it has been around for a very long period of time, engaging with all of the partners in the sector. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Our Honour, the Deputy President is not present at the moment. I invite nominations for an acting Deputy President. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I'd like to invite Senator the Honourable Lyndall Nurse to serve and nominate him as the acting Deputy President for the purpose of the Chairman of Committee's role.
We'll have a seconder, please. Seconded by Senator Dr. Rogers. The question is that Senator the Honourable Lyndall Nurse be elected as Deputy President of the Senate for the remainder of today's sitting. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator Nurse, thank you for agreeing to serve. The comments.
Mr. President, I'd like to move that Your Honour do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honourable Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Senate is in committee.
The second deputy committees, may we take the bill in parts? Part 1, clauses 1 to 5.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 through 5 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 1 do now stand part. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Against? Please say no. The ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 6 to 9.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 6 to 9 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 6 to 9 do stand apart. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 10 to 21.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 10 through 21 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 10 to 21 do now stand part. Stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 22, Part 4, clauses 22 to 25.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 22 to 25 stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 22 to 25 stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 36. 26, beg your pardon, to 32.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 26 through 32 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 26 to 32 stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 33, 35.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 6, clauses 33 to 35 stand part.
The question is that Part 6, clauses 33 to 35 stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 36 to 41.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 7, clauses 36 through 41 stand part.
The question is that Part 7, clauses 36 to 41 stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 8, clause 42.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 8, clause 42 stand part.
The question is that Part 8, clause 42 stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes, methinks the ayes have it.
Part 9, clauses 43 to 52.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 9, clauses 43 through 52 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 9, clauses 43 to 52 stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The first schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the first schedule, be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule, be the first schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The second schedule.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
The question is that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Fourth schedule.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Fifth schedule.
Mr. President, Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fifth schedule be the schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Sixth schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Seventh schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the seventh schedule be the seventh schedule to the bill.
The question is that the seventh schedule be the seventh schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Eighth schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the eighth schedule be the eighth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the eighth schedule be the eighth schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Ninth schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the ninth schedule be the ninth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the ninth schedule be the ninth schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the 10th schedule be the 10th schedule to the bill.
The question is that the 10th schedule be the 10th schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. They think the ayes have it. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as a facilitation of International Maritime Traffic Act of 2024.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the facilitation of Maritime Traffic Act 2024. Will all honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The next ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 3, sir, in the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Commissioners of Probate's Bill 2024.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This, I'm told, is a very simple bill, and I will depend on the legal expertise on the government side to go into any further details that will be required, and they are already prepped to so do. But we would have heard the Honourable Attorney General, who spoke in the other place, speaking about this bill, a short bill, a 103-year-old act, piece of legislation, that was last changed in the 1970s or 1980s, I believe, was the reference, and about the way in which the legal profession has evolved over time in terms of the membership of the bar. I believe we would have heard the Honourable Attorney General speaking about the fact that the bar currently has over 1,000 officers now registered as attorneys at law called to the bar, and therefore, in his view, at the time, this piece of legislation, which covered just a few things, really had become largely outdated, but also the purposes for which commissioners of probate were being used was also still necessary despite the expansion of the legal profession. You heard the Honourable Attorney General say in the other place, specifically on the method of remuneration, he made a reference to the fact that those persons were remunerated in an antiquated system at $4 for each document that they witnessed and how they wanted to change that. And you also heard about the length of time that the current Commissioner of Probate as an individual had served in that role, and therefore it is now time for us, notwithstanding the fact that the legislation is old, the functions are not necessarily being seen in the same way that they used to be at the time, that there was still a need for the function to persist, and that it was the proposal of that office to appoint a number of commissioners of probate as captured in section 3.1 here of the President may on instrument appoint any number of commissioners of probate not exceeding 7. And so that is the proposal as it now stands. So to go from 1 person who currently sits in the role to 7 persons who are up to the discretion of the President, and they will be responsible as listed in paragraph 3.2. The commissioners will be responsible for taking the acknowledgement and the probate of deeds in the form set out in the first schedule. The first schedule is appended to the bill. The first schedule simply covers a single paragraph, and it speaks about them witnessing the deed. The second schedule goes on to speak about the fees, which I referenced earlier. If the property is valued at over $500,000, the fee charge goes from $4 as it currently stands to $25. If the property is in excess of $500 or more, it is now going to be at $50, and for the power of attorney for $25. The other issue dealt with in the amendment to the legislation is also quite simple. It speaks to the appointment of acting commissioners in the instance that the commissioners are not available, those 7 of those that are proposed. And it also then goes on to speak very simply to the absence of pension, and it repeals the Commissioners of Probate Act Cap 120. And therefore, this is a repeal and a replacement with a new 8-paragraph piece of legislation that is now before us. Mr. President, I can say nothing more substantive than that on this particular item, and I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time.
Speakers. The speakers?
If there are no speakers, I'll close the debate.
Senator Tate.
Yeah. Mr. President, I'm permission to remain.
Yes, Senator Tate, you may make your contribution from the seated position. Welcome, happy to see you, Happy New Year.
Thank you, sir. Same to you. Mr. President, This bill is indeed a short bill in the full scheme of things, and it is an area of law that is not frequented as a matter of course. It's an unusual area, and these days it's hardly activated. But nevertheless, we have a bill before us, and it comes before us on the page of the objects and reasons as the 23rd day of January 2024, bill as amended, which I assume means that somewhere between the time it was first published and the time it got to us, amendments were made. So be it. Yes, it's a bill that it's an act that needs to be dealt with because the existing act was there since, was it 1903? Something like that, sir. My submission this morning, sir, is, or this afternoon I should say, is as usual to speak to drafting. And as short as the bill is, and as hardly used the function, as you know, this is not a function that's used regularly, it is still used. We are still doing an amendment, and I will keep saying in this chamber, when we're doing amendments, let's do it properly so that we don't have to come back to fix. Because what that does to those of us who practice is basically confuse the place. And we also are faced with reality that those who need to use the bill or the act have the challenge of trying to work out what the act or the law actually is if we have a series of amendments that need to be done post-enactment. Now, sir, if I can draw your attention to clause 3.2 of the proposed bill, which speaks to, and I quote, "The commissioners of probate shall be responsible for taking the acknowledgement and the probate of deeds in the form set out in the first schedule," which means that the form set out in the first schedule is legislated and must be followed in order to effect the purpose and the action of any commissioner of probate. That is the certificate, as it were, that must be attached to the deed that will be proved by this commissioner of probate. So when we look at page 6 of the bill, first schedule, it starts off with certificate, says certificate, and the first word in the schedule is appear before me this day. It's never going to be appear before me this day. It's always going to be appeared before me this day, ED. And in fact, if this is how it's supposed to be, it should have started off in the top left-hand corner with the word Barbados. It's going on an existing deed. The commissioner is proving a deed that would have been witnessed by a person who was not a lawyer or anybody who was qualified in the true sense to witness a deed. This section, this certificate, has to be put onto any document that is going to be dealt with by a commissioner of probate by virtue of section, right now, clause 3.2. So we go on, appear before me this day, and it really should be the blank day of blank. But let me go on. Appear before me this day, the name of the person. And for purposes of drafting, Mr. President, if you're not putting the person's address, you should at least put the person's occupation so you can identify the person. Because if there are two Reginald Farleys and we don't have an occupation, we may have a challenge identifying who appeared before the particular commissioner. If we're drafting and we're improving and we're amending, let's do it right, sir. We go on, the subscribed witness to the execution of the foregoing deed and made oath and say, no, nobody is going to put this on the end of a document and say. You make oath and say, but for purposes of this certificate where somebody has to prove that someone appeared before them and signed this document, it's going to be in the past tense, Mr. President. Say should be said. We go on to the next line. After the line, you have the executing party to the foregoing duly signed. What foregoing? It would have to be the foregoing deed. You can't just put to the foregoing duly signed. Make it make sense, sir. So in its current form, no right thinking, qualified person who is likely to be appointed a commissioner, and it's usually somebody senior. You will not find someone using this without making their own amendments. And by virtue of making their own amendments, they will become in breach of the legislation because they will not be following the format of the certificate. The executing party to the foregoing duly signed can't work. It is the same way we would say for regular documents, signed, sealed, and delivered, or signed and delivered, or signed. It is usually in the past tense. But I go on, Mr. President. This makes provision for a single person who would have witnessed a deed. But there are other types of persons, there are other situations where you will have persons in this category. And I would submit that, first of all, this certificate should properly be labeled ordinary probate certificate when there's one person. But there are situations where there are two or more persons that sign before a witness. There's also situations where it could be executed, the document could have been executed by a company, and it could have been executed by an attorney. And since clause 3.2 makes it mandatory that this particular clause goes at the bottom of the document to be proved, it stands to reason so as to ensure that commissioners of probate don't breach by virtue of putting a certificate other than that which is in the schedule, that the schedule should make provision for all possible forms that can be put at the bottom of a document, because it's not only ever going to just be a single person. There are other scenarios that could arise. So for purposes of compliance and to ensure that a commissioner of probate is not forced to create their own certificate, which by virtue, again, as I said, makes them operate in breach of the legislation because there is a form set out in the legislation, we need to relook the certificate, fix the certificate, and then make provision for the other types of certificate that could be possible in the event that it's not just a single person whose signature has to be proved. Now, there are some people who might feel that this is extra, as the young people will say, but if we are amending, and so as not to have to come back to make provision for it, and so as not to have commissioners of probate who are appointed by the President of Barbados, so this ain't an inky-dinky appointment. Inky-dinky is probably not parliamentary, so let me say, it's not an ordinary appointment. You have to be appointed by the President. So why not make the legislation that which it can, so that it can stay as is? It doesn't have to come back for amendment. And it always bothers me that things come to the Senate, and this one came already amended, so nobody bothered to look at the certificate. The main thing that is provided for in the body of the legislation that must go at the bottom of the document, and it has errors and it needs grammatical correction. It continues to concern me because this one was short, but we do this all the time. And the time has come when we need to be able to draft, and we need to draft properly, and we need to get things right the first time so that, as I've said ad nauseum, we don't have 2024 1 all the way up to 24, all the way to double E after going through the entire alphabet like how we had to do with NIS. So, Mr. President, I submit that before this bill is passed, it should be amended so that it can be properly put into the annals of our legislation. It really is high time that we get it right. And Kadir, this one is a short one, sir. This one is short. So it really somebody could have spent a little more time. And if you look at the precedents in the law books, every one of them, without more, appeared, ED before me, makes provision for occupation, made oath that she was present, blah, blah, blah. So if you didn't know what to do, go to the precedent. I have one here with all the types of certificates available. It's not rocket science, sir. So while there was a lot about we needed to amend it so that it becomes, you can charge more fees, I don't know, $4 and $25 seems to be in the same category of paucity, but that seems to be the standard depending on the particular role that has to be played. You took out the reference to private examination of married women. I agree that needed to come out. And we made provision for, well actually, the Chapter 120 as it currently stands makes provision for up to 7 commissioners. So that's not a change. That's just a continuation of the existing act. Can we just get the legislation right, send it back, fix it, bring it back, and then the body of the legislation is, to my mind, fine. The challenge is that the most important part, which is the part that has to go on the documents, needs amendment. As usual, sir. We need to do better, sir. Not we, they. Much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Tate. Senator Kevin Boyce.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I was waiting to hear my fellow Senator Nichols, who I had seen on the list, because I know he's a lot more emphatic when it comes to making statements, but I believe there's a method to the order. Following on from my colleague who sits to my right, I would profess, sir, that the concept of knowing the intricacies of probate in Barbados escapes me. So my contribution, as always, seeks to bring a collaborative approach to what I see from my perspective to be the issues relating and surrounding or seemingly indeed within the legislation, and perhaps seek to engage in a dialogue by which we come to an understanding and an approach which allows things to work. The starting point, as I was discussing with another senator, the one on my left, is to even understand what is the legislation before us. Simple question. Now, the bill, as set out, says an act to repeal and replace the Commissioners of Probate Act, Cap 120, and to provide for the appointment of the Commissioners of Probates and matters related thereto. What are Commissioners of Probates and what do they do? Simple question, and one that I believe should be addressed during the course of this dialogue. Now, sir, Commissioners of Probate, from my interaction, deals with the attestation of documents. And when we say, again, we use these big words, attest means to witness something that is done. As Senator Tate would have just pointed out, there are some concerns which then find themselves in the realm where Senator Nichols and I operate with regard to what you call proper attestation. So these persons are persons of import because these matters, while seemingly inconsequential at the time, lead to differences which then require resolution by the courts and end up filling the pockets of lawyers. And we know no one likes that, sir. But let's look at it generally, and then we will build ourselves to the narrow scheme of it. So, sir, I would assume that the Commissioners of Probate contemplated would deal with the 3 major actions or 3 major areas which you find yourself as a practitioner dealing with the law of testamentary and estate and the law of what's your succession. Again, sir, not my sandbox. Three major issues, sir. Grants of probate. Grants of probate, bit of a lecture today, is when you actually have the foresight to do a will and you go about the process where the person who is appointed as your executor takes the will and takes over the assets which you have left or bequeathed to your family and distributes it accordingly. So that's the first concept, grants of probate. Secondly, letters of administration. That's when you have not done a will. You know, the myth that if you do want something bad will happen. You have not done a will, or you could be like other persons who will say, let the best survive. Let he who is smartest from my kin survive and get, but anyway, sorry. A letter of administration is when you do not have a will, and then someone who is related to you goes before the commissioner of probate or the registry, I'm sure I'll be corrected, or make the necessary application with the guidance of his attorney to be the one to take forward disposing of the estate and distribution to persons who may be entitled, something along those lines. Thirdly, the concept of resealing. Resealing is when you have your will or your testamentary documents from a different jurisdiction, let's say Jamaica, Trinidad, or somewhere else in the Caribbean, or even the United States, United Kingdom, and you want these documents to be recognized in Barbados. It's a process whereby you go to the registry and you get the documents recognized so you can deal with the estate. Now, why is this relevant and why is this important? In speaking to a senior practitioner, it boils down to this. These matters are important because it deals with the transfer of wealth. It deals with the transfer of rights in situations where someone has passed away and family members, or whoever the property has been devised to, seek to move forward. And what we have is a situation which currently exists in where there is a delay in the process by which those rights are transferred. And when you have that delay, we heard earlier today, Mr. President, the government's commitment to efficiency and speed and doing business and all the other good things. So by the same token, when you have the delay in the transfer or the facilitation of the transfer of these rights, there are consequential issues, what we call even consequential losses, sir. So if we consider those three major avenues where commissioners of probates or persons of that ilk are involved, and we consider that these are important for the transfer of rights, we then realize that this is, as simple as it is, an important piece of legislation. We assume that the purpose of the legislation is to widen the net of persons who are capable of exercising these powers so as to increase the speed and efficiency to the three items I just mentioned. I don't know. It wasn't said, but I'm going to assume that that is the purpose. You know, as it said that was the purpose. In other words, from my thinking, the more persons you have dealing with this problem, the more persons you have dealing with grants of probate, letters of administration, and resealing, the faster these things could be done. And why is that important? Sir, currently, the time frame for getting a grant of probate in the Registry of Barbados is 18 to 24 months.
I'm not sure.
18 to 24 months, sir. However, you know I come with data, anecdotal as it may be. In Trinidad, as of October 2023, it was 6 years. So we can say we're not as bad as Trinidad. I hear politicians involving elective politics like to do that. We are not as bad as. However, on the other side of the spectrum, Jamaica's current wait time is 6 months. 6 months in Jamaica. So we can say that we are not as bad as, we could also say that we're not as good as, but you know, we like to lead. So we set ourselves in the parameters of what we seek to do. So perhaps the aim of this legislation is to increase the speed and efficiency by which these things are done. I don't know. aside in the document. Now, I don't know whether they're utilized for these purposes, but this is relevant to the purpose of what the legislation is being dealt with. So we have a situation where we then look at the time frame for probate matters, and we have a situation where we say, does this give us an opportunity to have a discussion about the registry? Does this give an opportunity to discuss the issue of resources being allocated for the registry? Because, in my opinion, it would aid the government in its objectives. So, some ideas, sir, and which we wish to draw to the attention, sir, is the fact that, simply put, currently, when you're going through these three processes that were identified, you still have to rely on manual searches. Now, what that means to the non-practitioners is that when someone is going about the exercise that we spoke about, you still have to go in the registry or have your clerk, go and search the file manually. Of course, that leads to the risk of human error, one, by the clerk who's doing the search, although the clerks, for the most part, are a lot more thorough than some of the attorneys. And then, of course, there is the risk that the information which the clerk is reporting on has not been updated. So in other words, certain firms and practitioners give qualifications about the search that was done, this was done by a human who had to rely on another human, and at the time of doing the search, it cannot be said with all certainty that all the information related to the file has been put on the file. That's a truism. That's a truism. So you call those qualifications which are being put into the process. So as we have this discussion about commissioners of probate, perhaps considerations could be made by the powers that be with regard to facilities for those in the registry who deal with related issues for the concept of automation in relation to the recording, which would then allow for quicker searches. And we heard the government today praising the efforts of the homegrown window that was done, single window that was done by the developers within the port. So certainly they ought to be commended, and maybe that type of exercise can relate and be encouraged within the registry as it currently stands. And sir, as we talk about the registry, I continue to use this forum to bring attention to issues which practitioners face. Now again, we have spoken here about the registry and online filing, and I'm pleased to report that the online filing is progressing. However, an issue which has come up in recent days with the online filing, and again, it's tangentially connected to the area that we're discussing, is the relation of the Easy Pay system with regard to the practicality of getting documents uploaded. There is now an issue when you have big documents, because sometimes you have voluminous matters, sir, to do with issues that impact Barbados and things that have to be paid, and there's a lot of evidence. And the concept, sir, where you used to take one document with 2 pages and it's easy to upload it. But what happens when you have a document with 2,000 pages? What happens when you have a document with 2,000 pages, which you then have to attach a fee to, but the persons are trained to charge for each page? You then have a consequential increase of cost, which has not been contemplated. And there's another factor, sir. Because the online filing is not as reliable as it could be, practitioners are often forced to still provide judges and the registry with hard copies of the documents. So it's raised not as a condemnation, but as an encouragement to say that we have started to see the impact. However, there are still some teething pains, and if those who have access to the coffers, you could turn things, or you turn and you get flow of revenue and resources, that while this area may seem simple, it is important to the commerce and to doing business in Barbados as identified by the leader of government business. So all in all, I believe the legislation is one, subject to the comments raised by my colleague, Senator Taze, in relation to the, sir, again, it seems granular, but these things do have an impact. But the purpose, and as indicated, the body of the legislation is one which I believe ties into the government's purpose with regard to business efficiency. So I have raised these issues, sir, while not directly to deal with the concept of commissioner of probates, but it is a wide enough topic, I believe, sir, that you granted me the indulgence to bring the attention to the Senate and to the wider populace as to some of the issues being faced by those who have to practice within the confines of the registry. But we should not end the debate, sir, without recognizing the stalwart effort by the registry, the registrars, the acting registrar, the deputy registrars, the registry staff, who go above and beyond consistently. The judges' clerks, who go above and beyond to facilitate lawyers, and some lawyers have some shenanigans. Not the ones in here, sir. But certainly they go above and beyond to facilitate doing the business for the people and the citizens of Barbados. But there's only so much that we can expect from persons if we do not give them the adequate funding and resources to do their job. And then we turn around and complain about delays. So, let us be fair. Let us be cognizant that we are all in this together, inspired by the words of the new Senator Morris, and have a dialogue which seeks to make the legislation work in the best interests of the citizens of Barbados. I thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Kevin Boss. No more speakers on this matter? Senator Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to express my appreciation to the honourable members who have spoken. I do want to take the time, though, to point out that we have been very fortunate to have the support under the leadership of esteemed jurist and retired Chief Justice, Sir David Simmons, the work of the Law Reform Commission, the Law Review Commission, and they continue to perform stellar work and to provide stellar service to the people of Barbados. Every piece of legislation, including the editorial things that can be raised, once it passes in the Honourable Chamber, it reverts to the Law Review Commission for finalization, Law Revision Commission, I'm sorry, for finalization before it is passed. And so things like ifs, ands, or buts, in some instances, if it is grammatical and it needs to be corrected, those are matters for the Law Review Commission, Law Revision Commission, and they will take the necessary steps to ensure it is accurate before it is passed. But I also am advised that these templates are guides, which then can be subject to those revisions by the Law Revision Commission and then tidied up for finalization. So with those few words, I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration.
The question is that I do not leave the chair, and the Honourable Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will all Honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Senate is in committee.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 1 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. All those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 2 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 2 do now stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
The question is that clause 3 do stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Clause 4, I beg to move that clause 4 do not stand part.
The question is that clause 4 do stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 5 do not stand part.
The question is that clause 5 do stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 6.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 6 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 6 do stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 7.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 7 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 7 stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 8.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 8 stand part.
The question is that clause 8 stand part. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
First schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
Mr. Chairman, with respect to the first schedule, do you have to put the question first? Or can I speak? Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, as I said when I made my submission, the current condition of the first schedule ought not to be submitted as is. The amendments ought to be made so that the bill is properly formatted using the correct tense, and also there's a word missing in terms of the exclusion party to the foregoing duly signed. Don't do this level of drafting at this level. We are the upper chamber. We need to have standards, Mr. Chairman, and I respectfully submit the amendments are sufficiently germane to the content of the certificate, which, as I said before, locks down the commissioners of probate in clause 3, subclause 2. They have to put this at the end of the documents. And no, Honourable to say, none of the attorneys that I dare say will be appointed as commissioners, and they're usually senior attorneys. In order for a senior attorney to put a certificate of this nature to the bottom of a document, they're going to mend it. They're going to fix it. Then you face the possibility that by doing that, somebody on the other side argues that is not consistent with the schedule in the first schedule of the bill, which will become the act. And then you spend time arguing about content. Well, we can fix it here. We are drafting. It is still a bill. Fix it so that it will be done properly. Add the other forms of certificate that can exist, as I alluded to earlier, where there's more than one person, where an attorney witnessed, or where a company executed the deed. This needs to be done. If we're doing it, do it properly. And this certificate should be properly labeled ordinary probate certificate, because there are different forms of certificate that can go to the end of a deed. And we don't need to be making ground for monkey to rampant because it's not done the right way. Commissioner of Probate does it the right way. It's inconsistent with the bill or the legislation, so there's a problem. There's an appeal. There is, and then we have the issue and the question: what was the intent of Parliament when the bill was passed? This needs to be fixed. So let it be fixed. How long will it take to be fixed? This is not a bill that has a deadline, that it cannot go back to the other place. Make the amendments and let it come back. They are sufficiently important, but it is also a situation that can be handled quickly.
So, Senator Tate, are you proposing then an amendment to?
I really don't like to propose amendments, but since I raised them, I am proposing that, first of all, the certificate should be called an ordinary probate certificate. Sir, I am proposing that rather than appear, it should say, appeared before me this day. What's his name? What's your name? Kevin Boyce, in brackets, attorney at law. So you need to put occupation. The precedents and the templates make provision for occupation because that's the only way you identify the person, because you don't get an address. You proceed to subscribe witnesses to the execution of the foregoing deed and made oath and said that he or she was present and saw the within named whoever, the executing party to the foregoing deed, or whatever the document is, because it could be deed, it could be a deed poll, it could be whatever it is. You just use deed, or you can put in brackets the type of deed. But you can't just have the executing party to the foregoing duly signed. The foregoing what? Signed, seal, and deliver the same as for his, her free and voluntary act and deed. So, was that clear? Appeared, said, foregoing deed, name it ordinary probate certificate, and then make provision for where two or more persons signed before one witness, where the execution was done by a company, or where the execution was done by an attorney at law. Mr. Chairman, those are my submissions to make this make sense, because otherwise we're once again passing legislation that we know has flaws, and God knows when they would get addressed, because I'm still waiting on the Barbados Water Authority amendment, when they were supposed to make provision for the residential persons, and certain people promised that we would come back, and we are still into our 4th or 5th year and they didn't come back. So previous leaders of government business made grandiose promises, but they never were fulfilled. So, on a serious note, if we are amending and upgrading, let us do it properly. I can send you, let me show you the precedent template here. I'm not making it up. And we need to do it properly because it is coming from our chamber. I again say, I don't understand how it gets to us when there are other lawyers in the other place, but sometimes people don't pay attention to schedules. But the reality is this schedule is important because it's tied directly to clause 3.2. So the Commissioner of Probate is, by all intents and purposes, supposed to put this certificate at the bottom of the document. To deviate puts them in breach of the legislation. To do it this way reflects on their integrity and their standard. No senior attorney is going to put this at the end of a document. I can say that because I wouldn't, and I'm a senior attorney. They're not going to do it because it's a reflection of it looks like you've made a mistake. So fix it now. There's no, like the NIS, we did it on the 29th of November, and it was to be committee effect on the 1st of December. We don't have that kind of pressure with this. So let's fix this one. Let's get one before it's too late. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, following on from my colleague, perhaps the persons on the government side responsible, I think the main crux of the argument, if I could attempt to assist, at the end of the day, sir, the certificate, the tense used seems to be the present while it's referring to a past event. Now, the precedence which I'm seeing here says appear should be appeared, and say should be said. No, I don't. And so there is a precedent and a guideline, and maybe if they can seek guidance from the parliamentary council who would have advised, maybe there's a purpose as to why they're using the present tense, and that could resolve the current debate that we're having here in committee. And this is the purpose for committees when we have the legislation to have this type of dialogue. So if someone could give some assistance from the government side.
Mr.
Senator Nichols?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I decline to get involved in what I consider a fairly rudimentary debate on text and language. But there are interpretations that can make sense of the present text, because the certificate is what the commissioner certifies at that moment and not speaking prospectively. So if you're speaking prospectively so that the certificate is something that you sure that it was certified on an earlier date, it would read in the past tense. But it can also make sense if the certificate reads in the present tense, that you appear before me this day and I certify at this time. So while I take the points made by the Honourable Senators, I don't see that there is much of a ado to say that the persons will not use this, or lawyers will not use this certificate. I also understood one of the points made by Senator Tate was that the persons that signing these documents and coming to have them attested by the Commissioner of Probate are not sufficiently delineated and defined in the certificate. But the truth is that the deed to which they append their names will set out who they are and the capacity in which they are executing the document. So the execution of the document is the important thing, but the attestation of that is done by the Commissioner of Probate to prove that it has been done. So you don't need to repeat the status and legal capacity of the persons who are executing the document in the certificate, because the deed itself will sufficiently set out the context in which persons are executing the transaction. So I don't really want to get involved in it, but it is not sufficiently in my mind to delay the passage of the bill over matters of grammar and text, because there is a alternatively proper legal basis for these words that exist in the present text. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I disagree with Senator Nichols. And moreover, the precedents that are used by the draftsmen support my position. So what he is doing, no disrespect, we have templates that we follow. What Senator Nichols is doing is supposing, save and accept the accepted standard for this type of certificate that are in all of the precedents, that are all the precedent books. Speak to what I'm saying. And it's sufficiently germane, it's sufficiently straightforward that it can be made and line up with the precedents. And then we still have the missing word. And I would be bold to say that the occupation, apart from the fact that it's provided for in the templates, helps to identify the person who is signing, who would not, the commissioner was not a party to the original document. The commissioner is speaking to the person that is appearing before him for the first time. So, if we're doing it properly, Mr. Chairman, it is submitted that that's what should be done. If it's not going to be done properly, well then I expect that what will happen as usual, it will be passed. But I couldn't sit here as a senior counsel aware of how things are supposed to be done, particularly in areas of probate. Queen's Counsel, I'm senior, but I'm a Queen's Counsel. I could not sit here and not bring it to the Senate's attention that there is a way, there is a standard, there is a template, there are templates, and I realize that Senator Nichols did not address the other types of certificate that also ought to be included in this legislation, because there are different scenarios that these certificates are going to be needed for. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cummings? So, at this time, we don't have a seconder for.
But Chair, I'd like to second the motion that Senator Tate has proposed in terms of making amendments to the schedule to the bill.
Mr. President, in responding to Mr. Chairman, in responding to the contribution from Senator Boyce, who invited the government side to seek clarification from the legal counsel, I can assure you that we do just that. And we have done so. And as I indicated in my closing on the bill, their guidance was that the purpose of the existence of the Law Revision Commission was for the purpose of making changes. They have taken the time to share with us the relevant sections of the Law Revision Commission, including the purpose of the commission to frame and insert in any law definitions of words and phrases used therein and to substitute for words and phrases used in any law, other such definitions as appear to the Law Review Commission to be appropriate, to correct grammatical, typographical, and other like mistakes and omissions in the existing laws and purposes, and for that purpose to make verbal additions, omissions, or alterations not affecting the meaning of any law, to supply or alter marginal notes or shoulder notes as may be the case, and to correct cross references in any law, down to the point of correcting punctuation. And I hope, Mr. President, that those who have raised the objections have taken the time to listen to the government's response and then are in a position to address their responses thereafter. Thank you very much, Mr. President. We have responded.
Thank you, Leader of Government Business. So I understand the position of government is passed, and it will go to the Law Review Commission, Law Reform or Review? Review to correct any issues. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I just need to say that is nonsensical if it can be fixed without going to law revision. They are sufficiently minor that they can be fixed without having to go to law revision. And the question also is the Law Revision Committee even working? Is it working? One of them isn't working, revision or reform. One of them isn't working. But the point is, it's sufficiently minor. It has been supported. We cannot keep doing this because it means that every piece of legislation that leaves this chamber has to get to revision to be fixed. Meanwhile, we have an amendment to deal with. Unnecessary, misdirected labor. But if that's how the government wants to do business, so be it. My comments are on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. President.
Senator Tate, are you withdrawing then?
No.
So your proposed amendment still stands?
Yes, without a doubt.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator.
Okay.
Walker.
So we have to do her proposed amendment first.
You got it.
Okay. So the question is that the first schedule be amended as proposed by Senator Tate. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. No. We think the noes have
No, sir, divide, please.
division.
Yes, thank you.
A division is called for. You.
Would you put the question again, please? Question is that you have that the first schedule, the schedule bill as amended. You need to put the question again so you can call the division.
as, okay. So
Just put the question again.
the question is that the schedule
The first schedule.
as with the proposed amendment be now the schedule, the first schedule to the bill. All those honorables, and we did, yeah.
Senator Cummings?
No.
No.
No. Senator Marlon Knight?
As amended. Oh, yeah. He said as amended. He said as amended. That's what he said. You want to tell me he said?
As amended.
Yeah.
For the records, we are voting right now on the proposed, the second schedule with the proposed amendment. Sorry, the first schedule.
The question is that the first schedule be amended.
The question is that the first schedule be amended. All those honorable senators in favor?
You're calling my name. So, me. Yes.
Senator Cummings?
No.
Senator Walcott?
No.
Senator Monroe Knight?
No.
Senator Dr. Haynes?
No.
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 Senator Nichols?
No.
No.
Senator
Yes.
Just to be clear, since there's some doubt. No. I am in support of the amendments proposed by Senator Tate. So that is a yes, but there seems to be some doubt as to what the vote is. So I am in support of the amendments as proposed. I would like a little clarity. So yes.
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 Chairman of the committee. 10 honorable senators voted no, and 7 honorable senators voted aye. Amendment therefore not
Also, the
passed.
division, 10 senators voted no and 7 voted yes. The noes therefore have it, and the proposed amendment is therefore rejected.
President, no, Mr. President, I do, however, want to take the opportunity for the benefit of all to reiterate the point which has been made that the proposed changes, where meritorious, will be sent to the Law Review Commission. Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
Question is that the first schedule be the schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Second schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be the schedule to the bill. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the President the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. All those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Commissioners of Probate Act 2024.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Commissioners of Probate Act 2024. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this honorable chamber do not break for lunch, do not be suspended for lunch, to resume at 3:15 p.m.
The question is that the Honorable Senate do now be suspended until 3:15 p.m. today. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The sitting is suspended until 3:15 p.m. today.
You take it back.